What happens when police officers handcuff a woman in a simple jacket, unaware that she's a legend of special operations? What happened after her single phrase in court silenced the room? Before continuing the story, write your city or country in the comments from where you are watching us. Your opinion inspires us to become better. That day, a museum-like silence reigned at the Vermont State Shooting Range before its opening. A low fog still clung to the tips of the wooden targets. Only the click of a bolt or the clatter of a thermos against a metal bench disturbed the morning calm. When Allison Drake entered the area, no one even turned their head, which was not surprising. A simple gray jacket, a baseball cap, worn jeans nothing special, no bracelets with slogans, nothing to suggest girls can shoot too. Only a long case slung over her shoulder and the gait of someone who knew exactly how many steps to the nearest cover. Frank Linder, the range manager, a former detective and seasoned cynic, was sitting behind the glass of his booth at that moment, sipping diluted coffee from a thermos with a sticker. Retirement is when you can finally ignore idiots without consequences, he thought. He watched the woman as if observing a new breed of dog, with slight distrust and professional suspicion. This is interesting, he muttered to himself. No sports gear, no hunting gestures, no curiosity. She just came, stood, and hit the center. The first shot sounded like a spit on glass, then the second and third. Allison did not adjust her aim for the wind, did not align the sights, did not purse her lips as beginners usually do. Her breathing was rhythmic, like a metronome. Inhale for 4 counts. Shoot on exhale calm, methodical, disturbing. 20 minutes later, one of the visitors, a burly man in a tactical vest, ran up to Frank, visibly agitated. "Hey, did you see her? She doesn't just shoot, she does the impossible." "Seriously? Who is she?" "What's your diagnosis, Joe?" Frank replied lazily. "Envy or suspicion?" However, he was already making a call. Half an hour later, 2 local police officers arrived at the shooting range. One young and nervous, the other older, with the face of a man who had seen enough in life to be surprised by nothing. "Good morning, madam. We need to see your identification and gun license," the older one said with a slight southern accent. Allison didn't flinch, didn't rummage in her pockets, just turned to them and firmly said, "I don't have them on me." The young officer had already started fiddling with her holster. The senior officer sighed and nodded. "Then you'll have to come with us." She offered no resistance at all. No gesture, no question, just a slight shrug, as if a polite invitation to accompany her. The strangest thing was that it seemed she was leading them, not the other way around. On the way to the car, Frank noticed that her gaze did not linger on the officers. She scanned the horizon, the tree line, the buildings, as if looking for observation points or an escape route. When she was brought to the station, an old building on the outskirts of Grey Hill, there was no drama. She sat in the cell, unmoving, not trying to speak. To questions, not a sound, not a name, not an address, no explanations. Only silence, which by station standards sounded louder than a siren. "Maybe we have a spy or a sect fanatic?" One of the officers mockingly said, taking a sip of rubber-tasting coffee. "Oh God, hopefully not a former Marine," added another. When Detective Noah Hudson, the only one in the precinct who voluntarily wore a suit, entered for questioning, he applied the classic formula. A little kindness, a little threat, a little help yourself. There are already whispers in Washington, coordinates have appeared. Either you cooperate, or you'll stay in this cell until the end of time. She looked at him with the eyes of a person accustomed to the range of a telescopic sight, without fear, without emotion, without the need to explain anything. When she was given water and her sleeve lifted slightly, the young police officer, with heightened curiosity, noticed, "That's rock climbing, right?" "A rope mark." "For the first time all day," she replied. "Almost." She was taken to court, an old building with wooden benches and creaky floors. Everything proceeded according to a boring routine. The prosecutor whispered about an unconfirmed identity. The lawyer complained that his client was not cooperating. The judge looked annoyed. And at that moment, the heavy oak doors swung wide open. An admiral in dress uniform entered the hall. His medals gleamed under the neon light. His steps sounded like a solitary march of salvation. The officers scattered throughout the hall instinctively snapped to attention. Even the judge straightened up, as if for an exam. "I declare this session closed," she announced after examining a sealed envelope that the Admiral handed over through the bailiff. "All charges are dropped immediately." When the guard removed Allison's handcuffs, she spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, but without a trace of doubt. "Pardon the inconvenience, sir." The Admiral nodded in response. Commander Hayes, the fleet owes you an apology. And then the room fell silent, because no one knew that they had just arrested a legend. The silence that fell after the Admiral's words seemed almost unreal. Even breathing ceased to be heard. The instant echo of the word commander reverberated off the paneled walls of the old courthouse and settled deep in the chest of everyone present. Judge Ellen Rose, a woman with 40 years of experience, a veteran of military legal service, and known as an ice block among her federal colleagues, made not a single superfluous movement, only straightened even more, and stood not as a judge, but as a person who had just realized whom she had tried to judge. Commander Hayes, she said, no longer as a representative of justice, but as a woman suddenly finding herself in the dock of history. If I had known, but I couldn't have known, Your Honor, Allison replied calmly, slowly standing up, straightening to her full height, as if a multi-ton burden had been lifted from her. And that was exactly what she was achieving. The solemn silence was broken by the first and completely inappropriate gesture of the appointed lawyer. He pushed back his chair and stood with the expression of a man who had just realized he had been defending a nuclear warhead, mistaking it for a toaster. Your Honor, that is, I apologize, sir, he stammered, addressing the Admiral. I, of course, was not informed. And you were not supposed to be, Mr. Hardy? The Admiral interrupted, not raising his voice, but with a tone that made the air denser. Thank you for trying. The man sat back down with an expression as if he had swallowed a ladle of hot cement. Judge Rose nodded again. Session closed. Destroy all records. All present will sign a confidentiality agreement. She did not use a gavel, she simply left, and that was far more eloquent than any bang on the table. Allison slowly turned to the detective sitting in the first row. Her face expressed bewilderment, not from fear, but from understanding. His name was Garrett Wells, and he was the police officer who had first ordered her to show her documents. He stood up and approached her uncertainly. Commander Hayes, he said, as if savoring the name. I must apologize. Allison looked him in the eyes. She no longer hid behind an ordinary face. She was not playing invisible. Now her gaze was precise, like a sniper's. It's not necessary, she said. You did your job, detective, and you did it well. Too well. He blinked, unsure whether to take it as a compliment. I really couldn't have known, he mumbled. That's why you know now, she gently replied. And that's enough. The Admiral, who had been silently observing the scene all this time, nodded. It's time, Commander. We have a report waiting in Washington. Allison turned back once more. By the door stood an elderly man in a cap with the inscription, Medical Service, Operation Desert Storm. He looked at her with an expression that mixed respect, surprise, and something else. Perhaps hope. Excuse me, madam, he said, coming closer. I was there in '91 as a medic with the Marines. I sat in the courtroom all morning, not understanding what was unusual about you. And now I understand. Everything about you is exactly as it should be. Thank you for your service, whatever it may have been. Allison didn't hesitate, extended her hand. He shook it firmly, and a spark of warmth lit up in her eyes. Thank you for being there too. We support each other, even if we don't realize it. As she left, the courtroom silently parted. The path was clear, and there was no fear, no submission, only sincere, deserved respect. Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows and a license plate that wasn't in any database was already waiting. The Admiral opened the door for her, and Allison, without a word, entered. We've returned everything to base, the driver, a young officer with an easily forgettable face, reported. Your team is already in Mansara. Excellent, she replied curtly. On the way, the Admiral asked, was it hard for you to stay silent? The hardest part was not reacting when they handcuffed me, she admitted. But that was the mission. Full immersion, even if it means immersion in humiliation. He nodded, respecting it with silence. A true silence, not a pause, but an acknowledgement. An hour later, she stood on the shore, gazing into the distance. Beyond the waves, a submarine was visible, aboard which a new phase was beginning. The name of her operation was engraved on a plaque in the briefing room. Safe haven, and all that remained for her was to disappear again, without awards, without interviews, without books. She took off her cap, turned her face to the wind, and whispered, Legends don't need orchestral music. A precise shot and silence are enough. Night suddenly fell on Port Winslow with that northern hue where the air feels as sharp as a freshly honed knife. In the window of the old shooting club, Blackened and permeated with tobacco smoke, a dim light fell on the floor, covered with traces of military boots. Frank Mason, the club owner and a man capable of recognizing a special operations agent among a crowd of farmers, was finishing putting away tools when he heard the door open. "We're closed," he grumbled without even turning around. "What if I came for what I left?" a familiar voice replied. Frank looked up. Allison stood in the doorway. She was not in civilian clothes, but not in uniform either. Something in between. A jacket with a worn collar, pants clearly not from a store. And that same gaze, which, if it could be measured, would equal a shot from a kilometer away. "You came for your rifle?" he stated, not asked. She nodded. He disappeared behind a screen, and a minute later emerged with a case. She knew what was inside. "We got a package from the sheriff with a note. Return to owner immediately." I didn't even open it. Did you imagine whose it was? Allison took the case, placed it on the table, opened it, and began assembling the rifle. Her movements were precise, almost musical. "You could have left and forgotten this place," Frank remarked. "But you came back. Why?" "Because they arrested me here," she calmly replied. "And now I'm here of my own free will. It's balance." He nodded, not even trying to understand, because he knew. When someone like her talks about balance, it's not philosophy, but the physics of survival. "I didn't stop you then," he said, looking through the scope as if he could travel back in time. "Though I could have. I realized that if I interfered, I'd only complicate the situation. But I called an old friend at the Pentagon." He was silent on the other end, but I know he heard me. Allison looked at him not as a range owner, but as a comrade. "Thank you, Frank. Sometimes one right action weighs more than 100 orders." She walked to the far firing line. The sun had already set, leaving the sky the color of burnt metal. She aimed at the target, barely discernible in the twilight. A shot. The rifle sounded like a sigh. The answer was silence. Frank, looking through binoculars, smiled. Right in the center without aiming in the twilight. "My God, how much do you have hidden there?" "Enough so no one asked that question aloud," she calmly replied. They returned to the house. Allison took off her gloves, carefully placed the rifle in its case, and suddenly asked, "Do you still keep that old army radio?" Frank froze. "I haven't used it in 10 years, but I didn't throw it away. Of course, it's in storage." "Are they planning something?" he replied, simply opening the case, taking out an inconspicuous envelope and handing it to her. Inside was a new number. No name, no code, just a number and a handwritten phrase. "If someone shoots like me, let me know." Vision set. Observation. It all starts with observation. He put the card in his shirt pocket. They said goodbye without extra words. Allison dissolved into the night like a shadow, leaving no trace, no reason to stay. Closing the door, Frank quietly muttered, "Some people don't come back for their things, but for silence." And he was right, because the one they called Commander Hayes wasn't seeking fame. She was seeking silence, to disappear again until the next time the silence became too loud.